The galaxy was vast, and humanity had always been a small part of it. For centuries, Earth had struggled to keep up with the advanced civilizations that roamed the stars. The Galactic Empire, an interstellar power so immense it made nations on Earth seem like tiny villages, had never taken much notice of humanity. To them, Earth was nothing more than a speck of dust in the endless void of space, a primitive world filled with backward people who couldn't even travel beyond their own moon without difficulty. But everything changed when the Empire decided to send representatives to Earth for what they called a diplomatic summit. It wasn't because they respected humanity or saw potential in its people. No, it was simply because the Emperor wanted to assert his dominance over every corner of the galaxy, no matter how insignificant. And so, under the shadow of their massive warships hovering above the planet, humans were forced to listen as the Empire dictated terms. Ambassador Robert Hayes stood nervously at the center of the Grand Chamber aboard the Ecliptica, the flagship of the Galactic Empire. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie, though he tried hard not to let anyone see his unease. Around him, towering alien figures moved with confidence, their sleek uniforms gleaming under artificial lights. Their eyes, some glowing, others cold and unblinking, stared down at him as if he were an insect beneath a microscope. At the far end of the room sat Emperor Varnock IV, a being whose very presence seemed to radiate authority. His skin shimmered like polished obsidian, and his voice carried a weight that silenced entire rooms. When he spoke, everyone listened, whether out of fear or respect. Today, however, there was no respect in his tone, only disdain. "You call yourselves intelligent," Varnock began, leaning forward slightly in his throne-like seat. His words echoed through the chamber, amplified by technology far beyond anything Earth could produce. "Yet here you are, clinging to your fragile rock while we have conquered the stars. Your ships are slow, your weapons weak, and your minds closed to the possibilities of the universe." Robert swallowed hard. He had rehearsed this moment countless times in his head, preparing himself for whatever insults the Emperor might throw his way. But hearing those words spoken aloud still stung. They weren't just aimed at him, they were aimed at all of humanity. Every scientist, engineer, and dreamer back on Earth felt the sting of those words too. "And yet," Varnock continued, his lips curling into a sneer, "you dare to claim equality with us? You think you deserve a place among the great civilizations of the galaxy?" He paused, letting his question hang in the air like a storm cloud. Then, with a wave of his hand, he dismissed Earth entirely. "You are children playing with sticks and stones. Until you can prove otherwise, your planet will remain under our control. Consider this an act of mercy." The room fell silent. Even the aliens standing guard shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension in the air. Robert clenched his fists, but forced himself to remain calm. Losing his temper now would only make things worse. Instead, he bowed slightly, masking his anger behind a mask of diplomacy. "We thank you for your consideration, Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady, despite the turmoil inside him. "Rest assured, humanity will continue striving toward progress. Perhaps one day we may earn your respect." Varnock chuckled darkly, clearly amused by the ambassador's attempt at dignity. "Respect is earned by strength, Ambassador Hayes, not empty words. Until then, remember your place." With that, the meeting ended. Robert returned to Earth feeling defeated, carrying the weight of the Empire's scorn on his shoulders. News of the insult spread quickly across the globe, sparking outrage and protests in cities worldwide. People marched in the streets holding signs that read, "Earth will rise," and "We are not weak." Social media exploded with hashtags, demanding justice, and leaders scrambled to find a way to respond to the Empire's blatant disrespect. Among the chaos, one person watched the news unfold with quiet determination. Jason Carter, a young engineer working at a small tech company in Chicago, felt a fire ignite within him. He had grown up fascinated by science fiction stories about brave heroes standing up against impossible odds. Now, faced with the reality of Earth's humiliation, He realized that the time had come for someone to step up and do something about it. Jason wasn't a soldier or a politician. He didn't have access to armies or wealth. What he did have, however, was a mind sharp enough to solve problems and a heart strong enough to take risks. As he sat in his apartment late at night, staring at blueprints scattered across his desk, he made a decision. If the Galactic Empire thought humanity was weak, then it was up to someone like him to show them just how wrong they were. His first step was reaching out to Dr. Laura Bennett, a physicist known for her groundbreaking research on quantum energy. Jason had followed her work for years, admiring her ability to think outside the box. When he contacted her, explaining his idea, she listened intently before agreeing to help. Together, they began brainstorming ways to create a device capable of challenging the Empire's technological superiority. Their goal wasn't destruction, it was ingenuity. They wanted to build something that would force the Empire to reconsider its assumptions about humanity. Something that would remind them that Earth wasn't just a forgotten rock floating in space. Something that would strike at the heart of their arrogance. As days turned into weeks, Jason poured every ounce of his energy into the project. He knew it wouldn't be easy. The odds were stacked against him and failure loomed large on the horizon. But deep down, he believed in the potential of humanity. He believed in the power of ideas, creativity, and sheer willpower. And most importantly, he believed that sometimes all it took was one person willing to stand up and say, "Enough." Little did he know, his actions would set off a chain of events that would change the course of history, not just for Earth, but for the entire galaxy. Jason Carter and Dr. Laura Bennett worked tirelessly in a small, cluttered lab hidden beneath an old warehouse on the outskirts of Chicago. The room smelled of burnt metal and ozone, a result of countless experiments that had fizzled out or exploded unexpectedly. Wires snaked across the floor, connecting half-built machines to monitors displaying streams of data too complex for most people to understand. But Jason and Laura weren't most people. They were driven by a shared purpose, to prove to the Galactic Empire that humanity wasn't as insignificant as they believed. Laura stood over a workbench, her hands steady as she adjusted a circuit board with precision tools. Her dark hair was tied back into a messy ponytail, and her glasses kept slipping down her nose, which she pushed up absent-mindedly every few minutes. "This is going to take more than just determination," she said, glancing at Jason as he scribbled notes on a clipboard. "We're talking about technology far beyond anything we've ever built before." "I know," Jason replied without looking up. His voice carried a mix of frustration and excitement. "But we don't have time to wait around for someone else to figure it out. If we can pull this off, it'll change everything." The project they were working on was called the Quantum Disruptor, a device designed to temporarily disable any machine within its range by disrupting its power source. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense. It didn't explode or fire projectiles. Instead, it targeted the very foundation of advanced alien technology, energy fields. By creating interference in those fields, the disruptor could render even the Empire's most sophisticated systems useless. It was a bold idea, almost laughably ambitious given Earth's limited resources. But Jason and Laura both knew that humanity's greatest strength had always been its ability to innovate under pressure. Throughout history, humans had faced seemingly insurmountable challenges and found ways to overcome them. This time would be no different. "The problem isn't the concept," Laura continued, leaning back to stretch her stiff shoulders. "It's the materials. We need rare elements, ones that aren't found naturally on Earth. Without them, the disruptor won't work." Jason nodded grimly. He had already anticipated this hurdle. The components Laura needed were scattered across the galaxy, locked away in asteroids, moons, and distant planets controlled by the Empire. Acquiring them would mean leaving Earth and venturing into dangerous territory. It was a risk, but one he was willing to take. "We'll find a way," he said firmly, setting the clipboard aside. "If we can get what we need, we can finish the disruptor and show the Empire exactly what humanity is capable of." Over the next few days, Jason began assembling a team. He knew he couldn't do this alone, not with the stakes so high and the obstacles so daunting. He needed people who were skilled, resourceful, and willing to put everything on the line for the cause. After some careful consideration, he reached out to 3 individuals he trusted implicitly. The first was Sarah Mitchell, a fearless pilot, who had spent years flying cargo ships between Earth's colonies. She was known for her quick reflexes and unshakable calm under pressure. When Jason explained the mission to her, she didn't hesitate. "Count me in," she said with a grin. "I've been itching for something more exciting than hauling supplies anyway." Next, he contacted Ryan Lee, a mechanic whose reputation for fixing anything from broken drones to malfunctioning satellites was unmatched. Ryan was skeptical at first, raising an eyebrow when Jason described the plan. "You want to build a device that can shut down alien tech? That sounds like science fiction." But after hearing Jason's passion and seeing the early designs, he agreed to join. "All right, I'm in. Let's see if we can make this crazy thing work." Finally, there was Emily Dawson, a linguist fluent in multiple alien languages thanks to her work decoding intercepted transmissions from the Empire. Her skills would be invaluable if they encountered hostile aliens or needed to navigate Imperial-controlled space. Emily listened intently as Jason outlined the risks involved, then nodded resolutely. "If this is our chance to stand up to them, I'm with you." With his team assembled, Jason turned his attention to acquiring a ship. Buying one outright was impossible. They didn't have nearly enough money. Instead, they decided to commandeer an old cargo vessel abandoned in a nearby scrapyard. It wasn't much to look at. Its hull rusted and its engines barely functional, but it would do. Over the course of several long nights, Ryan worked miracles, repairing the ship piece by piece until it was flight-worthy again. They christened it the Stellar Phoenix, a name chosen to symbolize hope rising from the ashes of despair. As preparations continued, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He dismissed it as paranoia at first, telling himself that the stress of the mission was getting to him. But one evening, as he walked home from the lab, he noticed a black car parked outside his apartment building. Its windows were tinted, making it impossible to see inside. The same car appeared the next day, and the day after that. "Someone knows what we're doing," he told Laura the following morning, pacing nervously in the lab. "I don't know how, but they're onto us." Laura frowned, tapping a pen against her chin. "Could be coincidence, or it could be someone leaking information. Either way, we need to move faster. If the Empire finds out about the disruptor, they'll stop us before we even leave Earth." Determined not to let fear derail their plans, the team doubled their efforts. Days blurred into nights as they worked around the clock, testing prototypes, refining designs, and stocking the Stellar Phoenix with supplies. Finally, after weeks of relentless labor, they were ready. Their destination was Kalos Prime, a remote asteroid belt rumored to contain deposits of the rare minerals they needed. It was a perilous journey, fraught with danger from both natural hazards and Imperial patrols. But failure wasn't an option. Humanity's future depended on their success. On the eve of their departure, Jason gathered the team in the lab for a final briefing. Standing before them, he felt a surge of pride mixed with apprehension. These were ordinary people, engineers, pilots, mechanics, and linguists, but together, they represented the best of what humanity had to offer. "This isn't just about proving ourselves to the Empire," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "It's about showing everyone, ourselves included, that we're capable of greatness. No matter how hard things get, no matter how many times we fail, we keep going. Because that's who we are." One by one, the others nodded, their faces set with resolve. They understood the risks and accepted them willingly. For the first time in a long time, they felt truly alive, driven by a purpose larger than themselves. The next morning, the Stellar Phoenix launched into orbit, leaving Earth behind. As the planet shrank into a blue dot against the vastness of space, Jason stared out the viewport, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. He knew the road wouldn't be easy, but he also knew one thing for certain. Humanity's spirit couldn't be crushed, not by arrogance, not by oppression, and certainly not by fear. And with that belief burning brightly in his heart, Jason steered the ship toward the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them among the stars. The stellar Phoenix drifted silently through the cold expanse of space, its engines humming softly as it approached the asteroid belt of Kalos Prime. The journey had been tense but uneventful so far, with Sarah Mitchell expertly navigating the ship through patches of debris and avoiding areas where Imperial patrols were known to operate. Despite her calm demeanor, she kept one hand hovering near the controls at all times, ready to make a quick escape if needed. Inside the ship, the mood was a mix of determination and quiet anxiety. Jason Carter sat in the cockpit beside Sarah, staring out at the endless sea of rocks and ice that made up the asteroid belt. It was both breathtaking and intimidating, a chaotic swirl of jagged shapes tumbling through the void. Somewhere within this jumble of cosmic rubble lay the rare minerals they desperately needed to complete the quantum disruptor. But finding them wouldn't be easy. "They're calling it the Graveyard Belt," Emily Dawson said from behind them, holding up a tablet displaying maps and data she'd gathered during their preparation. "Lots of ships have tried mining here over the years, but not many come back. Too much interference from magnetic fields messes with navigation systems." Jason glanced over his shoulder at her. "Great. Just what we needed. More danger." Emily gave him a small smile. "Don't worry, if anyone can pull this off, it's us." Despite her confidence, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. Every decision they made felt like rolling the dice, hoping luck would be on their side. He turned his attention back to the viewport, scanning the asteroids for any sign of movement. So far, the area seemed deserted, but he knew better than to let his guard down. The Empire might not expect humans to venture this far into their territory, but that didn't mean they weren't watching. "All right," Jason said, standing up and addressing the group. "Let's go over the plan one more time. Ryan, you'll suit up and head outside to collect samples. We'll use the ship's scanners to identify promising locations, but we'll need you to confirm the mineral composition manually. Laura, you'll stay on board and monitor the equipment. If anything goes wrong, we'll rely on you to keep things running smoothly." Ryan Lee nodded, already checking the seals on his spacesuit. "Got it. Don't worry. I've done this kind of work before. Just point me in the right direction." Sarah chimed in, her voice steady as always. "I'll stay close to the controls in case we need to move fast. This place is crawling with hazards, and I don't want to get caught off guard." With everyone clear on their roles, the team got to work. Using the ship's sensors, they identified several large asteroids rich in the materials they needed. Sarah maneuvered the Stellar Phoenix into position near the first target, carefully avoiding collisions with smaller rocks floating nearby. Once they were close enough, Ryan opened the airlock and stepped outside, tethered to the ship by a thin cable. The sight of him floating weightlessly among the asteroids was surreal. His helmet light cut through the darkness, illuminating fragments of rock and dust that sparkled faintly in the dim starlight. Back inside the ship, Laura monitored his progress on a screen, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You're good to start sampling," she said over the comms. "Just take it slow." Ryan moved methodically, using a handheld scanner to analyze each piece of rock he picked up. Most of them were useless, but after about 20 minutes he found something promising. "Found one," he exclaimed, dropping the sample into a container attached to his belt. "Looks like we're in business." Back on the ship, the others cheered quietly, relieved to finally have a breakthrough. But their celebration was short-lived. As Ryan continued collecting samples, the sensors picked up movement in the distance. At first, it was just a blip on the radar, too small to identify. Then, slowly but surely, the blip grew larger and faster. Guys?" Sarah said, her voice tinged with alarm. "We've got company." Jason rushed to the cockpit, peering out at the source of the disturbance. What he saw made his stomach drop. Dozens of small drones, sleek and menacing, were closing in on their position. Their metallic bodies glinted in the light of a distant star, and their movements were eerily synchronized. Clearly, they weren't natural phenomena. They were scavengers programmed to attack intruders and strip them of valuable resources. "Those things are heading straight for us," Sarah muttered, gripping the controls tightly. "What do we do?" "Keep calm," Jason said, though his own heart was racing. "Ryan, get back inside now. We don't have time to waste." "I'm on my way," Ryan replied, already retracing his steps toward the airlock. But the drones were faster. They swarmed around the asteroid where he was working, their sharp appendages slicing through loose chunks of rock as if searching for prey. Laura sprang into action, activating the ship's defensive systems. Though the Stellar Phoenix wasn't designed for combat, Ryan had managed to rig a few makeshift weapons during their preparations. Laser turrets mounted on the hull came online, targeting the nearest drones with bursts of red energy. Several of the machines exploded on impact, sending shards of metal spinning into space. But there were too many of them. For every drone they destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. The swarm surrounded the ship, battering it with relentless strikes. Alarms blared as the hull sustained minor damage, and sparks flew from overloaded circuits in the control panel. "We can't hold them off forever," Laura shouted, frantically adjusting power levels to keep the shields intact. "We need to get out of here." "Not until Ryan's back on board," Jason snapped. He turned to Sarah. "Can you create an opening, something to distract them?" Sarah hesitated for only a moment before nodding. With practiced skill, she fired the ship's thrusters, pushing it forward in a sudden burst of speed. The maneuver caught the drones off guard, scattering them momentarily and giving Ryan the chance. He needed to reach the airlock. Panting heavily, he stumbled inside and slammed the hatch shut behind him. "Go, go, go!" he yelled, pulling off his helmet as the others scrambled to secure the ship. Sarah wasted no time. She punched the throttle, sending the Stellar Phoenix hurtling away from the asteroid belt at maximum velocity. The drones pursued them for a while, firing laser-like beams that narrowly missed the ship's rear engines, but eventually they fell behind, unable to match the human vessel's agility. When they were finally clear of the swarm, the team collapsed onto their seats, exhausted, but alive. Ryan held up the container of minerals triumphantly, despite the chaos that had unfolded. "Well," he said with a shaky laugh, "that could have gone worse." Jason ran a hand through his hair, letting out a long breath. "Yeah, but next time let's try not to piss off killer robots, okay?" Though shaken, the crew couldn't afford to rest for long. They still had a mission to complete, and the Empire's reach extended far beyond the asteroid belt. Each step forward brought new dangers but also renewed determination. No matter how many obstacles stood in their way, they refused to give up. Humanity's survival depended on their success, and failure was simply not an option. As the Stellar Phoenix sailed onward, leaving the graveyard belt behind, Jason stared out at the stars once again. He thought about the challenges ahead and the people counting on them back on Earth. This journey was far from over, but with each victory, no matter how small, they proved that humanity was capable of greatness, and that was something worth fighting for. The crew of the Stellar Phoenix had barely escaped the asteroid belt with their lives, but they couldn't afford to relax. The adrenaline from their close encounter with the scavenger drones was still coursing through their veins, and the ship bore the scars of battle. Scorch marks on the hull, flickering lights in the cockpit, and a faint smell of burnt wiring lingering in the air. Despite the damage, they had succeeded in retrieving the rare minerals needed for the quantum disruptor. It was a small victory, but one that kept hope alive. Jason Carter sat in the dimly lit cabin, staring at the container of minerals on the table in front of him. His hands were trembling slightly, though he tried to hide it by folding his arms tightly across his chest. He knew how close they had come to disaster back there. If Sarah hadn't acted so quickly, or if Ryan had been even a second slower getting inside, they might not have made it out alive. The thought sent a chill down his spine. "We got lucky," he muttered under his breath, glancing up as Laura Bennett entered the room. She carried a tablet displaying diagnostic reports of the ship's systems, her expression grim. "Lucky isn't going to cut it next time," she said bluntly, sitting down across from him. "Those drones weren't random. They're part of the Empire's automated defense network. If we run into more of them, we'll need better weapons than what we've got." Jason nodded, rubbing his temples. "I know, but upgrading the ship isn't an option right now. We don't have the resources, and we can't risk stopping long enough to make repairs. For now, we just have to keep moving." Laura sighed, leaning back in her chair. We're pushing our luck, Jason. Every step we take deeper into Imperial space brings us closer to danger. Sooner or later, they're going to catch us. They won't, Jason said firmly, though his voice lacked conviction. Not if we stay smart and stick together. Before Laura could respond, Emily Dawson poked her head into the cabin. Guys, you need to see this. Her tone was urgent, and both Jason and Laura exchanged worried looks before following her to the cockpit. Sarah Mitchell was already there, her eyes glued to the view screen. On it was a grainy image of an Imperial cruiser, a massive, sleek vessel, bristling with weapons turrets. Its presence filled the screen, dwarfing the tiny Stellar Phoenix. The sight of it sent a wave of dread through the crew. They're hailing us, Sarah said, her voice tight with tension. What do we do? Jason clenched his fists, his mind racing. Running wasn't an option. The cruiser was too fast and its weapons far superior to anything they could muster. Fighting was equally hopeless. They'd be blown apart in seconds. That left only one choice: surrender. Respond to their hail, he instructed, stepping forward so he could address the Empire directly. Tell them we're a civilian cargo ship. Maybe they'll let us go if we play dumb. Sarah nodded, keying in the response. Moments later, a deep, synthesized voice crackled over the comms. Unidentified vessel, you are trespassing in restricted Imperial space. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. The message was clear and final, leaving no room for negotiation. Jason turned to the others, his jaw set. All right, everyone, stay calm and stick to the story. We're just ordinary traders who got lost. They have no reason to suspect otherwise. As the Imperial cruiser loomed closer, the crew worked quickly to reinforce their cover. Ryan Lee dismantled some of the makeshift weapons they had installed, hiding the components in storage compartments. Emily wiped sensitive data from the ship's computers, ensuring nothing incriminating remained. Meanwhile, Laura monitored the sensors, keeping an eye on the approaching cruiser. When the boarding party finally arrived, the tension aboard the Stellar Phoenix was palpable. 6 heavily armed Imperial soldiers clad in black armor marched onto the ship, their helmets hiding any trace of emotion. Their leader, a tall alien with glowing blue eyes, stepped forward and addressed the crew. State your purpose in this sector, he demanded, his voice cold and mechanical. Jason swallowed hard but forced himself to meet the soldier's gaze. We're traitors, he said, trying to sound as casual as possible. Our navigation system malfunctioned, and we ended up here by accident. We didn't mean to intrude. The soldier studied him for a moment, then gestured for his team to begin searching the ship. The crew watched helplessly as the soldiers moved through the corridors, inspecting every corner and opening every hatch. Jason felt his heart pounding in his chest, certain that they would find evidence of their true mission. But somehow they managed to avoid detection. After what felt like hours, the leader returned, holding up the container of minerals. Explain this, he said, his tone sharp. Jason hesitated, his mind scrambling for an answer. It's just raw material we picked up in the asteroid belt, he said carefully. We thought it might fetch a good price back home. The soldier stared at him for a long moment as if weighing the truth of his words. Finally, he lowered the container and signaled for his team to fall back. You're fortunate we have no use for primitive traders like you, he said dismissively. But consider this a warning. Leave this sector immediately or you will not be so lucky next time. With that, the soldiers departed, reboarding their cruiser and disappearing into the void. The crew of the Stellar Phoenix let out a collective sigh of relief, collapsing onto chairs and leaning against walls as the weight of their narrow escape sank in. That was too close, Ryan said, wiping sweat from his brow. If they'd found the disruptor schematics, we'd be dead right now. We can't keep taking risks like this, Emily added, her voice trembling. Sooner or later, our luck is going to run out. Jason nodded, his expression grim. You're right. We need to change our approach. Sneaking around isn't working. We need to get closer to the center of the Empire, to Zerion 7. That's where the real power lies. The others looked at him in shock. Are you serious? Sarah asked. That's suicide. Xerion 7 is the most heavily guarded planet in the galaxy. We'll never make it past their defenses. We don't have a choice, Jason replied firmly. If we want to strike back at the Empire, we need to hit them where it hurts, at the top. Emperor Varnock IV is visiting Xerion 7 soon for some kind of ceremony. If we can get inside, we might have a chance to confront him directly. Laura shook her head, clearly skeptical. Even if we manage to infiltrate the palace, what then? You think you can just walk up to the Emperor and demand respect? No, Jason admitted. But I can show him what humanity is capable of. With the quantum disruptor, we can shut down their technology right in front of them. Imagine the message that would send, not just to the Empire, but to the entire galaxy. The idea was bold, reckless even, but it sparked something in the others. For the first time since their journey began, they allowed themselves to imagine a future where Earth stood tall among the stars. It was a dangerous dream, but one worth fighting for. All right, Sarah said after a long pause. Let's do it, but we're going to need a plan, and a damn good one. Over the next few hours, the crew worked tirelessly to devise a strategy. Using Emily's knowledge of alien languages and protocols, they crafted fake identities as maintenance workers. Hired to service the palace's systems, Ryan modified the Stellar Phoenix to resemble an Imperial transport shuttle, while Laura fine-tuned the quantum disruptor, ensuring it was ready for action. By the time they reached Xerion 7, they were as prepared as they could be. The planet itself was a marvel to behold, a sprawling metropolis of towering spires and shimmering domes, surrounded by rings of orbital stations and defensive satellites. As they descended through the atmosphere, the crew marveled at the sheer scale of the Empire's capital. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once, a testament to the power they were about to challenge. When they landed at the palace docking bay, Jason took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. This was it, the moment everything hinged on. Success or failure, life or death, it all came down to what happened next. Let's move, he said, leading the way off the shuttle. As they stepped into the palace, blending in with the stream of workers and officials, Jason felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. They were walking into the lion's den, but they weren't alone. Together, they carried the hopes and dreams of an entire planet. And with every step forward, they proved that humanity's spirit couldn't be crushed, not by arrogance, not by oppression, and certainly not by fear. For the first time in his life, Jason truly believed that anything was possible. The palace of Xerion 7 was unlike anything the crew of the Stellar Phoenix had ever seen. Its corridors stretched endlessly, lined with polished black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Alien guards stood at every corner, their weapons gleaming ominously under the soft glow of overhead lights. The air buzzed faintly with energy, a constant reminder of the advanced technology powering the Empire's capital. To the casual observer, it was a place of awe-inspiring beauty and power. To Jason Carter and his team, it was a labyrinth of danger. Dressed in uniforms stolen from Imperial workers, the group moved cautiously through the halls, doing their best to blend in. Jason led the way, clutching a fake maintenance log in one hand while keeping the quantum disruptor hidden beneath his jacket. His heart pounded with each step, but he forced himself to walk steadily, avoiding eye contact with anyone who passed by. Behind him, Emily Dawson whispered translations of alien signs and directions into his earpiece, guiding them deeper into the complex. "This is insane," Ryan Lee muttered quietly as they turned another corner. "If we get caught now, we're dead." "We won't get caught," Sarah Mitchell replied sharply, though her tone betrayed her own nerves. She adjusted the tool belt around her waist, making sure none of the equipment rattled too loudly. "Just keep moving." Despite their disguises, the tension among the crew was palpable. Every glance from an alien worker felt like suspicion. Every sound of footsteps echoing down the hall seemed louder than it should be, but they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that failure wasn't an option, not when Earth's future hung in the balance. Their destination was the Grand Courtyard, where Emperor Varnock IV was scheduled to deliver a speech later that day. According to Emily's research, the event would draw thousands of spectators, including high-ranking officials and members of the imperial court. It was the perfect opportunity to strike, a single moment when the entire empire would be watching. If they could disable the palace's systems during the ceremony, they could humiliate the emperor in front of his own people and send a message loud enough for the entire galaxy to hear. But getting there wouldn't be easy. The courtyard was located at the heart of the palace, surrounded by layers of security checkpoints and surveillance systems. To reach it, the crew would need to navigate a series of locked doors, guarded entrances, and automated defenses, all without raising suspicion. "Next checkpoint ahead," Emily whispered into their comms. "2 guards stationed outside. They'll scan your credentials before letting you through." Jason nodded, signaling for the others to hang back while he approached the guards alone. He held up the forged ID card Laura had created, praying it would pass inspection. The first guard scanned the card with a handheld device, his glowing eyes scanning the holographic display. For a moment, Jason thought he saw doubt flicker across the alien's face. But then the guard stepped aside, gesturing for him to proceed. "You're clear," the guard said in heavily accented English. "Proceed to Section C." Jason exhaled silently, resisting the urge to run as he rejoined the group. "We're in," he whispered. "Let's move quickly." They continued deeper into the palace, following Emily's directions until they reached a service entrance leading directly to the courtyard. The door was sealed shut, requiring both physical access codes and biometric scans to unlock. Laura knelt beside the panel, pulling out a small device she'd rigged specifically for this purpose. "This might take a minute," she murmured, attaching wires to the lock mechanism. Her fingers flew over the controls, bypassing layers of encryption with practiced ease. After what felt like an eternity, the door hissed open, revealing a narrow maintenance tunnel. "Good work," Jason said, giving her a quick nod. "Let's go." The tunnel was cramped and poorly lit, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees to avoid hitting their heads on low-hanging pipes. The air grew warmer the farther they went, carrying the faint smell of ozone and machinery. Despite the discomfort, no one complained. They were close, so close, they could almost taste victory. Finally, they emerged into the shadows of the courtyard, concealed behind a row of towering pillars. From their vantage point, they could see the stage where Emperor Varnock IV would soon stand, flanked by banners bearing the Empire's insignia. Hundreds of chairs had been arranged for the audience, many already occupied by dignitaries and nobles eager to witness the spectacle. Above them, massive holoscreens displayed images of the Empire's achievements, celebrating its dominance over the stars. "It's perfect," Jason whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of distant conversations. "Once Varnock takes the stage, we'll activate the disruptor. With any luck, the entire system will go dark." "And then what?" Ryan asked, frowning. "Even if we pull this off, how do we get out alive?" "We'll figure that out later," Jason replied firmly. "For now, focus on the mission. Humanity's counting on us." As the minutes ticked by, the courtyard began to fill with more spectators. Jason watched as guards tightened their formations, scanning the crowd for potential threats. His grip tightened on the disruptor, hidden beneath his jacket. He knew that once they made their move, there would be no turning back. They were about to challenge the most powerful being in the galaxy, and the stakes couldn't be higher. When Emperor Varnock IV finally appeared, the crowd erupted into applause. His imposing figure cast a long shadow as he ascended the steps to the stage, his obsidian skin shimmering under the bright lights. A hush fell over the assembly as he raised a hand, silencing the cheers. Then, with a voice that resonated like thunder, he began his speech. "For centuries, the Galactic Empire has stood as a beacon of progress and strength," he declared, his words dripping with arrogance. "And yet, there are those who dare question our supremacy. Primitive worlds like Earth cling to their delusions of equality, refusing to accept their rightful place beneath us." Jason's jaw clenched as he listened, anger bubbling inside him. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. Slowly, carefully, he pulled the quantum disruptor from beneath his jacket, ensuring the device was aimed at the central control. hub visible on the far side of the courtyard. Beside him, the others tensed, ready to act if anything went wrong. "Remember," Jason whispered, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "On my signal," Varnock continued, his tone growing colder with each word. "Let this serve as a reminder to all who oppose us. Defiance will not be tolerated. Your planet exists only by our grace, and your survival depends on your obedience." That was all Jason needed to hear. With a deep breath, he activated the disruptor. At first, nothing happened. For a split second, Jason feared the device had failed. But then chaos erupted. The lights flickered and died, plunging the courtyard into darkness. Holoscreens sputtered and went blank, cutting off Varnock's speech mid-sentence. The hum of machinery ceased entirely, leaving an eerie silence. In its wake, even the guards froze, their weapons rendered useless as the disruptor disabled every piece of technology within range. Panic spread through the crowd like wildfire. Spectators shouted in confusion, scrambling to find exits or shelter. Guards barked orders, but without functioning equipment, their authority crumbled. Amid the commotion, Jason stepped forward, emerging from the shadows and walking toward the stage. "You call us primitive," he said, his voice amplified by the sudden quiet. He stood tall, his gaze fixed on Varnock, who stared back in stunned disbelief. "But we've proven today that no matter how advanced your technology, no matter how vast your empire, there will always be someone willing to stand up to tyranny." The courtyard fell silent, every eye turning to the lone human standing defiantly before the Emperor. For the first time, the Empire saw Earth not as a weakling, but as a force to be reckoned with. And though Jason knew the consequences of his actions would come swiftly, he also knew that humanity's spirit couldn't be crushed, not by arrogance, not by oppression, and certainly not by fear. For the first time in his life, Jason truly believed that Earth's future was in their hands, and nothing could stop them now.